Hello and welcome back. Now that you know a little bit more about the Persian Wars, I'd like to talk to you about something that's also near and dear to my heart, movies. In a lecture I call The Second Persian War and 300, How Accurate is the Movie? Well, in order to assess the veracity of anything that happens in the movie, let's talk about our sources for everything. The first of these is Herodotus' Histories. And then in 1962, someone read Herodotus' Histories and wrote the script for the 300 Spartans. And that's what that movie looks like. Then in 1998, an artist named Frank Miller wrote a graphic novel called 300. Finally, in 2007, Gerard Butler starred in a movie of the same name. So what are the common threads with all these things? Well, there are a few. You could break it down to these kinds of events. In many versions of the story, the Spartans kill a Persian envoy who comes to ask for submission from the great king, Xerxes. In some versions, the ephors forbid Sparta to go to war. Also, Leonidas marches off to Thermopylae with 300 Spartans in defiance of their order. In some versions, Leonidas' wife, Gorgo, tells him to come back with his shield or on it. Does this happen? Who knows? And Leonidas has a bunch of one-liners like, come and get them, when he's asked to put down his weapons by the Persians. Well, let's evaluate these claims one by one to see how we do. Do the Spartans kill the Persian envoy when he comes to ask for submission? It is true that the Persians sent envoys to the Spartans asking them for earth and water, signs of submission to the great king. It is true the Spartans and the Athenians killed the envoys who came asking for these things, but both of these events happened in 490 in the First Persian War. So this did happen, it's just not accurate. Did they throw the Persian envoy down a well? They did, as a matter of fact. They told them they could get plenty of earth and water down there. The second thing that happens in most versions of the story is that the ephors, overseers in Sparta, forbid Leonidas to leave with the Spartan army. And the reason for this is the festival of Carnea was being celebrated at the time, a religious festival that lasted a month long. Leonidas couldn't leave with the full Spartan army until this festival was over. Well, this is actually true. The Spartans could not leave with a full force of war until the festival was over. Leonidas was, however, allowed to leave with an expeditionary force of 300 Spartans, which is why the number is so small. But he didn't defy the ephors. They approved of this move. Leonidas' wife Gorgo tells him to come back with his shield or on it. And this is said to be a typical thing that a Spartan woman would say to her husband as he was leaving to encourage him to have valor, the kind of valor Tyrtaeus talks about. Do we know that Gorgo told Leonidas this as he left? No. But it makes for some great cinema. In the movie, when Leonidas is asked to put down his weapons by the Persians as they're about to attack, he tells them the following thing in Greek, Olon labe, come and get them. Did Leonidas ever really say this? I'm not sure. This saying isn't attributed to him until hundreds of years after the story really takes place. So our first source for this is kind of far off in the future. Maybe he said this, maybe he didn't. It makes for great cinema, though. One of the things that we see in the movie is that the character of Xerxes is presented as a god king. That is, he's very tall, and he believes himself to have divine powers, and those around him treat him as though he were a god. Is this true? Not at all. Xerxes, first of all, wore clothes around, and second of all, was an adherent to a religion called Zoroastrianism, which is a dualist religion from the East that the Persians practiced at this time. It's kind of a predecessor to the monotheism we're going to see later in other traditions of the Mediterranean. I get asked about a lot as a teacher of a classics is, how accurate is the look of the movie? That is, the people look a certain way in the movie. How accurate is their clothing? How accurate is their armor? Well, I can tell you that some of it's accurate and some of it's not. Here goes. Let's have a look at the warrior we see right here. He's wearing a helmet of the Corinthian type, and he's wearing a flowing red cape, which the Spartan soldiers were famous. He's wearing a hoplon shield. He's got a dory-style spear. Spartans did, in fact, wear Corinthian-type helmets. These are these kind here that have a lot of protection for the eyes, the nose, the cheekbones. A lot of protection for the back of the neck as well. However, no ear holes to hear through. They did wear those once upon a time. But did they wear them in the movie? We'll talk about that in a minute. Did they carry the Hoplon shield? Yes, they did. We'll talk about more about that in a minute. Did they use the Machaira sword? No. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The Machaira sword is real. We can see it in this red figure vase here. It's something that some Greek warriors did carry. Did the Spartans carry dory spears? Yes, they did. Did they wear any armor at all? Yes, they did, and at a certain point it looked like this hoplite corselet here. However, that's not the kind of armor they were wearing by the time the story takes place. So what kind of helmet did they wear? Well, I'm sad to say that as cool as the Corinthian helmet looks, that's not what they were wearing by the time Thermopylae took place. They'd switched over to the Pylos helmet just before this, and there are a couple of reasons for this. One, it's heavy and hot, and two, with all that protection for the head that it provides, you can't really hear much when you're fighting in it, and the phalanx formations that they used really required a lot of communication between captains and the individual soldier. So you had to be able to hear. It's tough to do in a Corinthian helmet. The Pylos worked a lot better. It doesn't look quite as cool though, does it? They did use the Hoplon shield, just like the one you see in the movie. They did not, however, carry a Machaira sword. Instead, they carried a Xyphos sword, the kind we see here. Xyphos is a short affair, you can see here, but it looks a little bit longer than a dagger. The whole affair would have been about 18 inches in length. And it's really more for poking and stabbing than it is for slashing or hacking, like the Machaira was. They did carry dory spears, like the ones you see in the movie. And here are some actual tips from that period. They did wear armor. They did not walk around shirtless. However, they did not wear the hoplite corselet that I showed you a minute ago. They instead wore something called linothorax armor. Linothorax is a little bit like mail in that it's smaller pieces that have been stitched together in some way to create a garment or a bit of armor that's actually quite flexible and easy to move around in. And again, in close phalanx formation, flexibility would have been good for the individual warrior, and it would have made armor easier to carry because it would have been lighter. What about the Persian warriors? In the movies they seem to be wearing pajamas and they seem to be decked out in gold. Well, I can't speak to the gold, but I can say that they did fight in what would be the equivalent of pajamas. They were very lightly armored, and in fact their shields were typically wicker. And we can see the pajama type outfits that they're wearing right here. A number of Iranian citizens groups in America got upset around the time of the release of 300, feeling like its depiction of Persians in general was in some way racist. And I can see this. The Persian god king seems decadent. Those around him seem decadent or like bad stereotypes of Persians. But you have to remember that the movie is based on a comic book, which is in turn based on a movie, which is in turn based on Herodotus. Herodotus saw the Persians in a certain way. He saw them as luxury-loving and very un-Greek. So the movie, in some ways, is true to Herodotus in that it makes the Persians look very un-Greek and foreign. Is it an accurate depiction of how Persians would have actually looked at the time? I don't think so. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. Stay tuned for my next lecture on classical Athens and the art that it produced.